Good times and great music at 2 and URFM 103.7. Let's have a look at some of the things happening in the world of education. We do that with John Fischetti, professor from the University of Newcastle, who at the moment, John, you've been looking around and the government have decided that some more bricks and mortar may very well be the way to go to bolster up some of the things in education land. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. The Minister of Education, the Deputy Premier, has announced, and education's been in the news a lot in the last week. They've bumped up new teacher salaries, Mark, to $85,000 starting in October for a brand new teacher who's fully accredited. That's not a bad go, and probably the third highest starting salary of any profession. And they've also decided it's time to do some refurbing. A lot of hand sanitizer was bought there for a couple of years, and they delayed a lot of the construction projects. But as you know, when you went to school, what do you think the era was of the building you went to school in? Was it out of the 60s, 70s?
So starting school in 1982, we were in buildings that definitely went back to about the 1920s. A couple of the wooden ones may very well even have been a little bit before that. So we're talking, 50 years?
Yeah. Definitely. And
60. How bad's my math? 60 years. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 60.
Most of the buildings around here are in the 60-year range. A lot of them were built in an era where air conditioning, because of the power supply and the cost, was not even thought of. So no heat and no cooling, which is a crazy way to go if you're trying to send your kids to school. Many schools have been refurbed, or part of them have been, but the government's now spending $3.5 billion on 15 new primary and secondary schools, and a lot of money to refurb some whose bones are good, but the insides need to be a little fixed up.
I can also remember going through that era when when we all of a sudden needed some more buildings. The demountables came in. I mean, they're not very much. We don't use those anymore, do we?
Yeah.
As in we're not still bringing those in?
Because of growth in the region, and some of that's facilitated in the last 3 or 4 years, the region like the Hunter expanding. There's some primary schools with a couple dozen.
Wow.
Demountables.
That's crazy.
And some with at least a handful. And each of those, for those that don't know, it's like a giant set of portable trailers that turn into classrooms that hold about 30 to 35 kids. They have their own air conditioning system and their own self-contained, but they're out the side in the paddock that's next to the school. And that's not a really good way to go. They're vulnerable in terms of big storms. It also is culturally just not part of the school. So replacing those is a really good thing. But we have communities growing left and right all throughout the Hunter. And parents would know that if their kid's in a demountable, they can't wait for next year when they'll get into big school.
Yeah, they start the year and what year are you in? What room are you in? Oh, I'm in the demountable. Oh, that sucks.
The question becomes if any of the learning design for classroom space can facilitate kind of the learning that we spend a lot of Wednesdays talking about, Mark. If you just build a school that it looked like did with me, a bunch of classrooms with desks facing forward and a teacher's desk up front, we're not taking advantage. So many of the new schools are being built with modern design in place. So flexibility, if you want to do group projects, the desks are easily moved. If you want to have examinations, they can be separated. Lots more creature comforts. There are schools where you might even get to pick whether you're at a high top chair or a low top one, depending on your height or your preferences. In Sydney, where they're building vertical schools, basically towers, you could picture that you're going to do your PE on the roof, where you can do high-intensity training. They're using that AstroTurf fake grass, and you can do some workouts. You just can't play soccer, or you're going to kick the ball down onto the road beneath. But lots of creativity in this design now to create activity-based and engaged learning space. The problem is, Mark, in the 70s, when some of that was tried in Australia, and particularly in the U.S., they came up with this open school stuff where they didn't build walls and it was all supposed to be creative. It just created a lot of noise. So my worry is that we just don't use the fad of 2023 to create giant open spaces that won't allow teachers to use the space when they actually do need exams, or they do need quiet, or they do need kids in separate little pods. Because what happened there is they just took the old chalkboards, remember those things back in the day, and they line them up. And they just create fake walls anyway. So we want is flexibility, but not goofy, just faddish kind of policy.
Well, there's the other side of that too, John. I mean, for those who would possibly still be in the sector, would go, well, why do we need to really trial this? See, we tried it back then.
Right.
Admittedly, we didn't try it hard enough. If we tried it back then and it didn't work, why waste money? So therefore, it doesn't get the real. We don't try it properly this time around.
Exactly, and some of that involves even things like the lighting. So fluorescent lighting, which can trigger epileptic-like seizures. And for some, even if it doesn't get to that level, you might not have even realized under fluorescent lighting, Mark, your brain could be locked down. It's almost like stadium lighting bumping you in the eyeballs. So they're moving into more natural light settings. They've tried schools without windows. That doesn't work. You need a little bit of nature to see. In fact, if you're staring out at a tree, you're not a lack of focus. In fact, I might be listening more. When I'm looking during a lecture and I'm looking out the window, I'm actually focusing more. So we don't want to repeat the mistakes of creating prison-like settings or ones that don't use creature comforts like proper lighting, natural lighting, green, and chairs that actually, if you're in the middle years of school from years 5, 7, or 8, when you're growing, there's some very uncomfortable ergonomic chairs out there that meant I was always accused of fidgeting. But in fact, I was just hurting sitting down. So they're at least taking care of some of that so you can focus on learning.
Yeah, there is a no one size fits all, but it looks like we're trying a few different things. John, it's always a pleasure. We'll talk to you next time around.
Thanks, Mark.
There is our Professor of Education from the University of Newcastle, John Fischetti, on some of the things happening in the scholastic infrastructure space, if you will, at 2NURFM 103.7.
A broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.